The thermometer reads 40 degrees below zero. At this temperature, human flesh freezes solid in under 60 seconds. Exposed skin turns white, then gray, then black. Breath crystallizes the moment it leaves the lungs and falls to the ground like snow. Now imagine fighting a war in these conditions. Not for hours, not for days, for 17 days straight. This is what 12,000 American Marines faced in November and December of 1950, high in the frozen mountains of North Korea, at a place called Chosin Reservoir. But the cold was not their only enemy. 120,000 Chinese soldiers had slipped across the border in complete silence. They moved only at night. They buried themselves in snow during daylight, and now they had completely surrounded the Marines in those frozen mountains. The Americans were outnumbered 10-1. They were 78 miles from the nearest friendly position. They had limited ammunition, dwindling medical supplies, and no clear path to survival. Military logic said they should die. Every tactical calculation pointed toward annihilation. What happened next would become the most brutal and most legendary fighting retreat in American military history. But here's what the history books often forget to mention. Some of those Marines didn't die from bullets. They didn't die from artillery or bayonets or any weapon the Chinese carried. They froze to death in their sleep. They froze to death standing in foxholes. They froze to death with their eyes open, rifles still clutched in hands that had turned to ice. The frozen hell of Chosin Reservoir wasn't just a battle. It was a test of whether human beings could survive conditions that seemed designed to kill them, and whether they could fight their way out of a death trap that should have been inescapable. This is that story. Before the first shot was fired, the fate of 12,000 men was decided by two generals who hated each other. General Oliver Smith commanded the Marines. He was a quiet, stubborn professor type who sensed a trap. While his superiors ordered him to race north, Smith deliberately slowed down, stockpiling ammunition and building an airstrip in the middle of nowhere. That stubbornness would save the entire division. Because his boss, General Edward Almond, was catastrophically wrong. Almond was an arrogant aristocrat who despised Asian soldiers. He swore the war would be over by Christmas and dismissed reports of Chinese troops as hysteria. He ordered the Marines to sprint into the mountains, blind and unsupported. Pulling the strings from Tokyo was General Douglas MacArthur. Fresh off his victory at Incheon, his ego convinced him that China was bluffing. He ignored every warning sign, sending the Marines straight into the jaw of the trap. But wars aren't fought by generals, they are fought by men like Hector Cafferata. A 21-year-old giant from New Jersey, Cafferata was a semi-pro athlete with hands like shovels. In a few days, he would find himself alone on Fox Hill, batting away live enemy grenades with a shovel and firing his rifle until the woodstock caught fire. And Captain William Barber, a Kentucky farm boy who would soon be shot through the leg, refuse evacuation, and command his men from a stretcher for 5 days straight while bleeding into the snow. These were the men walking into the icebox. The generals had set the trap. Now, the Marines had to survive it. 5 months earlier, the war seemed lost. Then, General MacArthur pulled off a miracle landing at Incheon, cutting the North Korean army in half. Victory seemed certain, but MacArthur got greedy. He didn't just want to save the South, he wanted to conquer the North. He ignored the one rule of warfare in Asia: do not provoke China. While MacArthur boasted to the president that the war would be over by Thanksgiving, Mao Zedong was moving an army in silence. 300,000 Chinese soldiers slipped across the Yalu River. They moved only at night. They hid in forests during the day. They carried no radios. For 6 weeks, an entire army vanished into the snow. It remains one of the greatest intelligence failures in American history. MacArthur and Almond dismissed the warning signs as hysteria. They ordered the Marines to march straight into the mountains toward the Chosin Reservoir. The road was a single lane, twisting through 78 miles of frozen peaks. It was a tactical nightmare. General Smith smelled the trap. While Almond screamed at him to drive faster, Smith deliberately slowed down. He ordered his engineers to widen the road. He stockpiled ammunition. He built an airstrip in the middle of the wilderness. Almond called him a coward. Smith ignored him. He knew something his superiors didn't. He wasn't building a supply depot. He was building a fortress for the storm that was about to hit. By late November, the 1st Marine Division had reached the Chosin Reservoir. The reservoir was actually a man-made lake created by Japanese engineers during their occupation of Korea, used to generate hydroelectric power. It sat in a high mountain valley surrounded by peaks that rose to 6,000 feet. The water had frozen solid. Snow covered everything. The Marines established positions at several points along the road that skirted the reservoir. The largest concentration was at Udamni on the western side of the lake, where 2 regiments, approximately 8,000 men, prepared to continue the advance westward. South of Udamni at Hagaru-ri, General Smith established his division headquarters. Engineers were frantically building an airstrip on the frozen ground, working around the clock to create a runway long enough for transport aircraft. Further south, at Kotori and Chinhungni, additional Marine units guarded the road back to the coast. On paper, the situation looked manageable. In reality, it was catastrophic. The Marines were strung out along a single road, their units separated by miles of frozen mountain terrain. Between each position, the road passed through narrow valleys where a handful of defenders could hold off a regiment. The Chinese had already infiltrated the gaps, and the cold was becoming as dangerous as any enemy. By November 26th, temperatures had dropped to 35 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. This was cold beyond anything most Marines had experienced. It was cold that killed. Men who removed their gloves to perform delicate tasks, loading magazines, tending wounds, writing letters, discovered that their fingers stuck to metal. The skin tore off when they pulled away. Weapons had to be fired regularly just to keep them from freezing solid. Vehicle engines had to run constantly. If they stopped, they might never start again. The food froze in the cans. Men ate rations that were solid blocks of ice, cold beans, cold beef, cold fruit cocktail, all of it requiring body heat just to thaw enough to chew. Water froze in canteens, plasma froze in bottles, rendering it useless for transfusions. Sleep was dangerous. Men who dozed too long woke with frostbitten extremities, or didn't wake at all. Sentries were rotated every 30 minutes because standing still in the cold was a death sentence. And then there were the Chinese. On the night of November 27th, approximately 120,000 soldiers of the Chinese People's Volunteer Army attacked. It begins just after 10 o'clock in the evening. The Marines at Udamni are settling into defensive positions for the night. Some are cleaning weapons. Some are trying to sleep. A few are gathered around small fires, desperate for any warmth, knowing the flames make them visible targets. Then they hear it. Bugles, high, piercing, alien. Not military calls they recognize. Something older, stranger, designed to terrify. The sound echoes off the frozen mountains, impossible to locate, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Then whistles, thousands of whistles, shrieking in the darkness, then the sound of running feet. Private First Class Hector Cafferata is in a foxhole near the perimeter when the Chinese hit. He has been assigned to Fox Company, which is dug in on a hill overlooking Toktong Pass, 7 miles south of Udamni. The company's mission is to keep the road open between the advance units and the rear. Cafferata is sharing the foxhole with his friend Kenneth Benson. Neither of them is wearing boots. They had removed them to warm their frozen feet when they heard the bugles. There is no time to put the boots back on. The Chinese come in waves, hundreds of white-clad figures pouring down from the ridgelines. They run directly into Marine positions, screaming, firing, throwing grenades. The night explodes into chaos. Cafferata grabs his rifle and starts shooting. The M1 Garand holds 8 rounds. Cafferata fires them, reloads, fires again. Chinese soldiers fall. More come. He can hear them, shouting, can see their breath crystallizing in the muzzle flashes, can smell the cordite and the blood and the strange, acrid scent of frozen vegetation. A grenade lands in the foxhole. Cafferata grabs it with his bare hand and throws it back. It explodes in midair, showering him with fragments. Another grenade lands. He throws it back. Another and another. He loses count. His hands are torn, bleeding, burning with cold and pain. He keeps throwing. At one point, Cafferata runs out of ammunition. He grabs his entrenching tool, a small shovel, and uses it as a weapon, swinging at Chinese soldiers who have reached the foxhole. He kills 1, maybe 2. He doesn't remember clearly. When Marines from a nearby position finally fight through to relieve him at dawn, Cafferata has killed an estimated 15 Chinese soldiers by rifle fire and thrown back an unknown number of grenades. He is wounded in multiple places. His hands are shredded. He has been fighting for almost 7 hours in bare feet in temperatures of 35 below zero. He will lose most of his toes to frostbite. He will spend 18 months in military hospitals. He will be awarded the Medal of Honor. But that morning, he is just one Marine among thousands fighting for survival. At Udamni, the situation is even more desperate. 2 Marine regiments, the 5th and 7th Marines, are under attack from 3 full Chinese divisions. The assault comes from every direction simultaneously, a tidal wave of infantry that seems to have no end. The sound is overwhelming. Rifles crack, machine guns hammer, mortars detonate with flat, percussive thumps. Artillery roars, and beneath it all, those bugles keep playing, mixed with the screams of the wounded and the shouts of men trying to find their units in the chaos. The smell is worse, cordite everywhere, sharp and chemical, mixed with the copper scent of blood that freezes almost as soon as it leaves the body. Burning vehicles add petroleum smoke to the mix. The cold itself seems to have a smell, a dry, metallic tang that scrapes the throat and makes breathing painful. The Chinese come in human wave attacks, throwing themselves against Marine positions with suicidal determination. Many of them are poorly armed. Some carry only grenades, some carry rifles with only a few rounds of ammunition. But there are so many of them. The Marines hold. This is not eloquent courage or cinematic heroism. It is brutal, ugly, terrifying combat at close range. Men kill with bayonets and rifle butts and entrenching tools. Men are stabbed and shot and blown apart. Men cry for their mothers in 2 languages. By dawn on November 28th, the Marines at Udamni are completely surrounded. Hundreds are dead. Hundreds more are wounded. Ammunition is running low, and the Chinese are still coming, but the perimeter has held. 7 miles to the south, at Hagaru-ri, General Oliver Smith receives fragmented reports from the chaos. Communication is sporadic. Radio batteries fail in the cold. Telephone lines have been cut. Runners are shot trying to reach command posts. What Smith knows, his division is surrounded. The road between Udamni and Hagaru-ri is cut. The road between Hagaru-ri and Koto-ri is under attack. He is responsible for 12,000 Marines who are scattered across 15 miles of frozen mountain road, and every single one of them is now trapped behind enemy lines. Smith takes off his glasses, polishes them, puts them back on. He begins giving orders. The airstrip at Hagaru-ri must be completed, no matter the cost. Air support must be called in at first light. Ammunition and supplies must be redistributed from units with surplus to units running low. The wounded must be consolidated for evacuation. Every available man must be armed and ready to defend. There is no panic in Smith's voice, no urgency that might spread fear to his staff. He speaks calmly, methodically, as though this were a routine logistics exercise rather than a catastrophe. Inside, Smith knows the truth. His Marines are in the worst situation any American unit has faced since the Bataan Death March. If he makes wrong decisions now, none of them will survive. But he does not let that show. He cannot. The next 4 days blur into a continuous nightmare of cold and combat. At Udamni, the Marines repel attack after attack, but they cannot break out. The road south is blocked by Chinese forces dug into the hills. Every attempt to push through is met with withering fire. At Fox Hill, Captain William Barber's company endures what will become one of the most famous defensive stands in Marine Corps history. Barber's mission is simple and suicidal. Hold Toktong Pass, the narrow defile between Udamni and Hagaru-ri, so that when the regiments to the north attempt to break out, they will have a route to escape. If Fox Company fails, 7,000 Marines will be trapped with no way out. On the first night, Barber is shot through the hip and leg. The bullet shatters bone and tears muscle. He cannot walk. He refuses evacuation. His corpsmen bandage him, pump him full of morphine, and rig a stretcher so he can be carried from position to position. For the next 5 days, Captain Barber commands Fox Company from that stretcher, unable to stand, bleeding into the snow, watching his men die around him. The Chinese attack every night. They come at midnight, at 2 in the morning, at 4. They probe for weak points. They mass for human wave assaults. They drag away their dead and wounded before dawn so the Marines cannot count them. Fox Company starts with 220 officers and men. After 5 days, only 82 are still able to fight. The rest are dead, wounded, or so badly frostbitten they can no longer hold a weapon. But they hold the pass. At Hagaru-ri, the situation is equally desperate. The perimeter is thin. There are not enough Marines to properly defend the entire base. Service troops, cooks, clerks, and headquarters personnel are given rifles and sent to the line. Engineers abandon their work on the airstrip when attacks threaten and pick up weapons. The Chinese assault every night. Every morning, Marine work parties venture out to collect the dead, American and Chinese alike. The frozen bodies are stacked like cordwood, too many to bury in ground frozen 3 feet solid. The cold continues to take casualties. Men go to sleep and never wake up. Their hearts simply stop in the night as their core temperatures drop below survivable levels. Others lose fingers, toes, feet, hands to frostbite so severe that the flesh turns black and must be amputated. Medical care is a nightmare. The surgical tent at Hagaru-ri operates around the clock, but the conditions are nearly impossible. Blood plasma is useless, frozen solid. Surgical instruments must be heated before use or they freeze to the patient's flesh. Doctors operate wearing multiple layers of gloves, trying to maintain dexterity while keeping their own hands from freezing. The wounded who survive surgery face new dangers. Evacuation is impossible. The road to the coast is cut and the airstrip isn't finished. Men who would survive their wounds in a proper hospital die from shock, from infection, from cold. The corpsmen work themselves to the point of collapse. They crawl from foxhole to foxhole in the darkness, treating wounds by touch, thawing morphine syrets in their mouths because the drug has frozen solid. Many of them die doing this work, exposed to fire, unable to take cover, focused entirely on the men they are trying to save. And every night, the Chinese come again. If you appreciate stories like this, stories that reveal the brutal reality of history through the eyes of the men who lived it, take a moment to subscribe to Not Nostalgic History. We don't sanitize the past. We don't glorify war. We show you what actually happened, and we trust you to understand why it matters. Your subscription helps us keep telling these stories. Now, back to the frozen hell. By December 1st, General Smith faces the most difficult decision of his career. 8,000 Marines are surrounded at Udamni. They cannot stay. Their ammunition is running low, their casualties are mounting, and the Chinese will eventually overwhelm them through sheer numbers. They must break out. But breaking out means fighting through 14 miles of mountain road to reach Hagaru-ri. That road passes through narrow defiles where Chinese forces are dug in. It passes over hills where machine gun positions have been established. It passes through terrain so rugged that a handful of determined defenders could hold off an army, and the Marines must bring their wounded with them. This is not negotiable for Smith. Marine tradition holds that no man is left behind. Not the wounded, not the dead. Every casualty will be brought out, even if it slows the column to a crawl. Every Marine who fell at Udamni will be carried to safety or buried with honors, not abandoned in the frozen mountains to be mutilated by the enemy. Smith issues his orders. The breakout will begin on December 1st. It will take 3 days. At Udamni, the officers gather their men and explain the situation in blunt terms. They are surrounded. They are outnumbered. They have 78 miles to cover before they reach the coast in safety. Between here and there, an estimated 100,000 Chinese soldiers are waiting to kill them. They are not retreating. This is not a defeat. They are attacking in a different direction. This phrase, attacking in a different direction, becomes the defining motto of the Chosin campaign. Attributed to General Smith, though his exact words are debated, it captures the spirit of what the Marines must do. They are not running away. They are fighting their way through. Every step toward the coast will be taken in the face of enemy fire. On December 1st, the column begins to move. The wounded go first, loaded onto trucks and jeeps and anything else with wheels. Some trucks have been converted into makeshift ambulances, their beds filled with stretchers. Others carry stacks of frozen bodies, the dead who are being brought out rather than abandoned. Behind the vehicles come the walking wounded. Men with bandaged arms, bandaged legs, bandaged heads, men on crutches and improvised canes, men being supported by their comrades. They can still fight if necessary. Many of them will. Behind the wounded come the combat troops, the men who will bear the brunt of the fighting. They are deployed on both sides of the road, advancing through waist-deep snow, climbing frozen hills to clear Chinese positions before the column passes. Progress is measured in hundreds of yards per hour. Every ridgeline must be taken. Every Chinese machine gun nest must be silenced. Every bend in the road is a potential ambush site. The Marines advance, fight, advance again, always pushing south. The cold is brutal, temperatures ranging from 25 to 30 degrees below zero. Men who stop moving die. Men who fall asleep in the snow die. Men who sweat from exertion find their clothing freezing solid, turning their uniforms into coffins of ice. Air support helps. Marine and Navy aircraft fly continuous missions despite the terrible conditions, strafing Chinese positions, dropping napalm on troop concentrations, parachuting supplies to the struggling column. The pilots fly at extreme low altitude in mountain terrain, risking death with every run. Many of them die. But air power cannot substitute for infantry. The Marines must take each hill, clear each valley, secure each stretch of road with their own bodies. The worst comes at a place called Hellfire Valley. It is a narrow defile where the road passes between steep hills, a natural kill zone where defenders can pour fire onto any column trying to pass. The Chinese have fortified it heavily. Task Force Drysdale, a mixed unit of British Royal Marines, American Marines and Army soldiers, had tried to force through this valley on November 29th. They were slaughtered. Over 300 men were killed, wounded, or captured in a single afternoon. Burning vehicles still litter the road, their frozen corpses still inside them. Now the main column must pass the same way. The Marines attack the hills on both sides of the valley, trying to clear the Chinese positions before the vehicles attempt the run. They fight uphill in knee-deep snow under fire from above, in temperatures that make rapid movement impossible. Men fall. Others take their places. They reach the ridgelines. They dig out the Chinese with grenades and bayonets. It is not enough. When the vehicle column attempts to pass, Chinese fire still rakes the road. Trucks are hit. Men are killed. The convoy staggers through anyway, drivers accelerating through the fire, wounded Marines in the truck beds shooting at muzzle flashes on the hillsides. The column leaves dead behind for the first time. There is no choice. To stop and recover the bodies would doom everyone. It takes almost a full day to pass through Hellfire Valley. When the last Marines emerge on the southern side, they have lost dozens more dead and wounded. But they have broken through. Behind them, the Chinese try to close the road again. They are too late. The bulk of the Udemni garrison has escaped. On December 3rd, the head of the column reaches Fox Hill. Captain Barber's company has held for 5 days. Of the 220 Marines who started, 82 are still able to fight. 26 are dead. The rest are wounded, frostbitten, or too exhausted to stand. Barber himself is still on his stretcher, still refusing evacuation, still issuing orders. He has been shot twice. He has not slept more than an hour at a stretch in 5 days. He is nearly delirious from pain and exhaustion. But his men held the pass. The link-up between the Udamni column and Fox Company is not a celebration. There is no cheering, no relief. The men from both units are too exhausted, too frozen, too numbed by everything they have endured. They look at each other with thousand-yard stares, the expression of men who have seen too much death. They do not stop. They cannot. The column continues south toward Hagaru-ri, growing larger as scattered units join. They are a river of frozen men streaming down the mountain road, dragging their wounded, carrying their dead. The Marines reach Hagaru-ri on December 4th. For the first time since November 27th, there is something resembling safety. The perimeter here is stronger. The airstrip, finally completed by exhausted engineers working under fire, is receiving transport aircraft. Supplies are coming in. The wounded are being flown out. But there is no rest. General Smith knows they cannot stay. Hagaru-ri is still surrounded. The Chinese are massing for another assault. Every day, the Marines remain, gives the enemy time to reinforce. The breakout must continue. For 36 hours, the Marines reorganize at Hagaru-ri. The wounded are loaded onto aircraft. Nearly 4,500 casualties are flown out over 2 days, a massive airlift that operates continuously despite Chinese sniper fire and mortar attacks on the runway. Fresh ammunition and supplies are distributed. Some reinforcements arrive. Army soldiers who had been holding other positions, Marines flown in from rear areas. The ranks are rebuilt, though not nearly to full strength. The dead are buried when possible, or loaded onto trucks to be brought out. No one will be left behind. On December 6th, the column moves again. The march from Hagaru-ri to Koto-ri is 11 miles. It takes 2 days. The Chinese attack the column continuously, pressing from both flanks, trying to cut the road behind the lead elements, attempting to trap sections of the column and destroy them piecemeal. The Marines fight every step, advancing and defending simultaneously. The nights are the worst. The Chinese mount major assaults under cover of darkness, when American air power is limited. The temperature drops to 40 below. Men die from the cold as readily as from bullets, but the column keeps moving. On December 7th, the advance elements reach Koto-ri. Another pause, another reorganization. Another opportunity to evacuate more wounded and resupply for the final push. But there is a problem. 10 miles south of Koto-ri, at a place called Funchalin Pass, the road crosses a narrow bridge over a deep gorge. The Chinese have blown the bridge. Without that bridge, the vehicles cannot proceed. Without the vehicles, the wounded cannot be moved. Without moving the wounded, the Marines cannot escape. They will be trapped in the mountains until the Chinese overwhelm them. General Smith faces a choice that seems impossible. He decides to build a new bridge. The gorge at Foxholes Pass is 16 feet wide and 1,500 feet deep. The road passes over a concrete structure built around large steel pipes that carry water to the hydroelectric plant below. The Chinese have used explosives to drop a section of the bridge into the abyss. There's no way to repair it from materials available in the mountains. The bridge sections will have to be flown in. The Air Force and Marine logistics officers scramble to find a solution. They locate prefabricated bridge sections at a base in Japan. Components designed to be transported and assembled in the field. Each section weighs 2,500 pounds. No one has ever airdropped anything this heavy. The parachutes needed do not exist in sufficient quantities. The weight might tear free from any rigging that can be improvised. They try anyway. On December 7th, transport aircraft begin dropping bridge sections into the frozen valley near Foxholes Pass. Some crash and are destroyed. Some drift off target and cannot be recovered. But enough survive. Marine engineers, working in temperatures that freeze their tools to their hands, drag the sections into place. Army engineers from the 1st Combat Engineer Battalion join them. They work through the night, under sporadic fire, racing against time and cold. By the morning of December 9th, the bridge is complete. It is a rickety, improvised structure that looks like it might collapse at any moment. The engineers are not certain it will hold. There is no time to test it properly. The first vehicle to cross is a bulldozer. It crawls onto the bridge, inches forward, the structure groaning and swaying beneath its weight. It reaches the other side. The column follows. One by one, trucks and jeeps and tanks crawl across the improvised bridge, over the abyss, past the point of no return. Chinese forces fire on the crossing, but they cannot stop it. The Marines have performed an engineering miracle under fire, in conditions that should have made the task impossible. The road to the coast is open. 10 more miles. 10 more miles of frozen road, of Chinese attacks, of cold that kills as readily as any weapon. 10 more miles, carrying the wounded, carrying the dead, carrying the weight of everything they have endured. The Marines walk. They fight. They die. They keep going. Hector Cafferata is carried on a stretcher, his frost-bitten feet blackened and useless, his hands wrapped in bandages soaked with frozen blood. He will never walk without difficulty again. But he is alive. Captain Barber is still giving orders from his stretcher, though by now he can barely speak. His wounds have become infected. He drifts in and out of consciousness, but he will not leave his men. Thousands of others, unnamed in the histories, forgotten by the world, simply put one foot in front of the other and continue. They have no choice. To stop is to die. On December 11th, the head of the column reaches Hungnam. The port is crowded with ships, Navy vessels waiting to evacuate the United Nations forces from northeastern Korea. The largest amphibious withdrawal since Dunkirk is underway. Over 100,000 troops, along with 98,000 Korean civilian refugees, will be evacuated before the Chinese arrive. As the Marines enter the port, they pass through army units that have been holding the perimeter. These soldiers stare at the frozen column with expressions of disbelief. The Marines look like ghosts. Their faces are blackened with frostbite. Their uniforms are torn and blood-stained. They walk with the shuffling gait of men on the edge of collapse. But they are still carrying their weapons. They are still in formation. They are still, recognizably, a military unit, not a mob of refugees, not a broken rabble, but an intact division that has fought its way through hell. Some of the watching soldiers begin to cheer. The Marines do not respond. They are too exhausted, too frozen, too numbed to feel anything resembling triumph. They have survived. That is enough. The Battle of the Chosin Reservoir lasted 17 days, from November 27th to December 13th, 1950. American casualties were staggering. 718 Marines were killed in action. 192 Army soldiers died. Over 3,000 men were wounded severely enough to require evacuation. Thousands more suffered frostbite injuries, many of which would result in amputations. The British Royal Marines who accompanied Task Force Drysdale lost over half their strength. South Korean soldiers attached to American units died in numbers that were never properly counted. But the 1st Marine Division survived. Of the approximately 12,000 Marines who entered the Chosin Reservoir, over 78% walked out under their own power. They brought their wounded. They brought their dead. They maintained their unit integrity. They emerged as a fighting force, battered but unbroken. The Chinese paid a far higher price. Exact numbers remain disputed, but American intelligence estimated that between 30 and 40,000 Chinese soldiers were killed or wounded at Chosin. Several Chinese divisions, the 59th, 60th, 76th, 77th, 78th, 79th, 89th, and 94th, were effectively destroyed as fighting units. Some were never reconstituted. Many of the Chinese casualties were not caused by American weapons. They were caused by cold. The Chinese soldiers who attacked at Chosin were even more poorly equipped for the weather than the Americans. Many wore canvas sneakers instead of boots. Many had quilted cotton uniforms inadequate for temperatures of 40 below. They had almost no heated shelters, limited medical support, and supply lines that failed completely in the frozen mountains. Chinese soldiers froze to death in their foxholes. Entire platoons were found frozen solid, still in attack formation, killed by cold before they could reach Marine lines. One Chinese regiment was discovered by American patrols sitting upright in the snow, every man dead, frozen so quickly they had not had time to lie down. The Chinese High Command, which had expected to annihilate the Marine Division in 3 days, was forced to acknowledge disaster. General Song Shailun, commanding the Chinese forces at Chosin, reportedly wept when he learned the full extent of his casualties. The battle that was supposed to be the destruction of American forces in Korea had become instead the destruction of Chinese forces at Chosin. The Chosin Reservoir became a defining moment in Marine Corps history, mentioned in the same breath as Belleau Wood, Iwo Jima, and the Battle of Chosin. But what does it mean? Not a victory, in any conventional sense. The Marines had been forced to abandon their positions, to withdraw nearly 80 miles under enemy pressure. The campaign to reunify Korea under Western government had failed. Within months, the war would settle into a bloody stalemate along the 38th parallel that would last for 2 more years. Not a defeat either. The Marines had fought their way out of a trap that should have been inescapable. They had inflicted catastrophic casualties on the enemy. They had demonstrated that American forces could not be easily destroyed, even when surrounded and outnumbered 10-1. Perhaps it is best understood as a testament to endurance. The Marines at Chosin proved that human beings can survive conditions that should kill them if they have discipline, leadership, and the determination to keep going. They proved that an army's strength is not measured only in numbers, but in training, cohesion, and will. They also demonstrated the terrible cost of arrogance. Douglas MacArthur's refusal to believe intelligence reports, his dismissal of Chinese warnings, his blind certainty that victory was assured, these failures nearly destroyed a Marine division. The men who froze to death in those mountains paid for their commander's hubris with their lives. MacArthur was removed from command 5 months later, in April 1951, after publicly challenging President Truman's authority to set Korea policy. His dismissal was long overdue, but it came too late for the men who died at Chosin. Hector Cafferata spent 18 months in military hospitals recovering from his wounds and frostbite injuries. He lost most of his toes. He never regained full use of his hands. But he survived. In 1952, President Harry Truman presented him with the Medal of Honor for his actions on Fox Hill. Cafferata was characteristically modest about the award. He felt he had simply done what any Marine would do. He felt he had been fighting for the men beside him, not for medals or glory. Cafarata returned to civilian life, worked as a hunting guide in the Rocky Mountains, and rarely spoke publicly about his experiences at Chosin. He died in 2016 at the age of 86. Captain William Barber also received the Medal of Honor for his defense of Fox Hill. His leg never fully healed. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life. He remained in the Marine Corps, rose to the rank of colonel, and served 2 tours in Vietnam. He died in 2002. General Oliver P. Smith continued to command the 1st Marine Division through the end of the Korean War. He was promoted to lieutenant general and later served as commander of Fleet Marine Force, Atlantic. Historians credit his cautious preparations. The supply depots, the improved roads, the airstrip at Hagaru-ri, with saving his division from annihilation. He died in 1977, never having received the full recognition he deserved. General Edward Almond, whose reckless orders helped create the disaster at Chosin, was never held accountable. He was promoted to lieutenant general and continued his career without significant consequence. He died in 1979. Douglas MacArthur, the architect of the March to the Yalu, lived until 1964, still believing he had been right about everything. History has not been kind to his judgment. There is a final image from the Chosin Reservoir that haunts anyone who studies this battle. In the spring of 1951, when the snow melted and United Nations forces briefly reoccupied parts of the Chosin area, patrols discovered what the Marines had left behind. They found frozen Chinese soldiers still sitting in foxholes, still clutching weapons, still staring toward positions that no longer existed. They found bodies stacked in ravines where they had been pushed by bulldozers, too many to bury. They found burned-out vehicles with frozen corpses still inside. And they found Marines. Not many. Smith's order to bring out the dead had been followed with remarkable fidelity, but some had been missed in the chaos. Some had fallen into crevasses or been buried in snow. Some had crawled away from the column to die alone. These bodies were recovered and buried with honors, their families finally given closure after months of uncertainty. But the mountains themselves had become a graveyard, a permanent memorial to the thousands of Chinese soldiers whose bodies were never recovered, whose families were never notified, whose names have been forgotten by history. They were farmers and workers and students, most of them. They had been told they were defending their homeland against American aggression. They had marched into the frozen mountains with inadequate clothing and inadequate supplies and inadequate understanding of what they would face. And they had died. They froze in their foxholes. They were torn apart by artillery. They were cut down by machine gun fire in suicidal human wave attacks. They died screaming, or they died silently, and they died in numbers so vast that their commanders concealed the truth for decades. The Chinese soldiers at Chosin were not evil. They were not monsters. They were human beings sent to kill other human beings by governments that had decided those deaths were acceptable. This is the truth about war that we must never forget. It is not fought by nations or ideologies. It is fought by people, by individuals with names and families and hopes that will never be realized. The frozen hell of Chosin claimed all of them, American, Chinese, Korean, without discrimination. 74 years have passed since the guns fell silent at Chosin Reservoir. The veterans who survived are almost all gone now. The last gatherings of Chosin Few, the Association of Survivors, are small affairs, a handful of elderly men in wheelchairs, trading memories that no one else can understand. When they are gone, the battle will exist only in books and documentaries and the fragile memories of those who listen to their stories. But the lessons of Chosin endure. It teaches us that war is not glorious. The men who fought at Chosin did not feel heroic. They felt cold and terrified and sick with exhaustion. They watched their friends die. They killed other men at close range and lived with those memories forever afterward. Whatever courage they displayed was not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep fighting despite fear so overwhelming it could have paralyzed them. It teaches us that leadership matters. Oliver Smith's stubborn caution, his refusal to advance as quickly as his superiors demanded, saved 12,000 lives. Edward Almond's arrogant dismissal of intelligence nearly destroyed them. The difference between survival and annihilation often comes down to the judgment of a single individual making decisions under impossible pressure. It teaches us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have no other choice. Hector Cafferata was a hunting guide from New Jersey. William Barber was a farm boy from Kentucky. They became legends because circumstances demanded it, not because they sought glory. And it teaches us that the cost of miscalculation falls on those who have no power to prevent it. The Marines at Chosin did not decide to march to the Alu River. They did not ignore the intelligence about Chinese infiltration. They did not underestimate the enemy or assume victory was certain. They simply followed orders and nearly died because those orders were catastrophically wrong. There is a memorial in Quantico, Virginia, dedicated to the men who fought at Chosin Reservoir. It shows a column of Marines trudging through snow, their heads bowed against the wind, their faces hidden beneath parkas and hoods. Some are carrying wounded comrades. Some are dragging equipment. All are moving forward, one step at a time, through the frozen hell. The statue captures something essential about what happened in those mountains. The unglamorous, grinding determination to survive. Not a cavalry charge or a dramatic last stand, but simply the refusal to give up when giving up would have been the easier choice. The men who walked out of Chosin did not ask to be heroes. Many of them spent the rest of their lives uncomfortable with that label. They knew the truth, that survival had involved as much luck as courage, that many better men had died while they had lived, that the whole campaign had been a disaster created by failures of command. But they had walked out, through temperatures that froze flesh in seconds, through enemy forces that outnumbered them 10 to 1, through 78 miles of mountain road that should have been impassable. They had carried their wounded. They had brought out their dead. They had maintained their honor when honor was all they had left. And when it was over, when they finally reached the ships waiting at Hungnam, when they sailed away from North Korea and left the frozen mountains behind, they carried something with them that would never leave. The memory of the cold, the memory of the fear, the memory of the men who didn't make it. The frozen hell of Chosin Reservoir was a tragedy created by arrogance and a survival achieved through suffering. It was a battle that should never have been fought and a retreat that should never have been necessary. But it happened, and because it happened, we have an obligation to remember, not to glorify what happened there, not to pretend that war is noble or that violence solves problems, but to honor the men who endured the unendurable, who kept faith with each other when everything else had failed. They were ordinary men who did extraordinary things because they had no other choice. They were Marines, and they walked out of hell. The temperature was 40 degrees below zero. And still, they walked.